to address the issues facing Tennesseans today. From 10 News, this is Inside Tennessee.
Good morning and welcome to Inside Tennessee. I'm your moderator, John Becker. We're going to hear from 3 Republicans who want to replace a longtime voice in Knox County. We're talking about Harry Brooks, who served in the state legislature for 16 years. We'll get to that race in just a second, but first, we turn our attention back again to the 2nd Congressional District. Just to remind you, it covers a large swath of East Tennessee, some 700,000 people represented by Jimmy Duncan's district. He's held that seat for 30 years running. He is not running for re-election, but one of the people who would like to replace him is here with us, and we welcome David Stansberry, a Republican, to the broadcast. Nice to have you with us.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
John North is my co-moderator today. He works right alongside me here at Channel 10, and let's get started with why you are running for this seat.
I've got a variety of experience that I feel like can be of service to the people of the 2nd Congressional District. I'm a working man, so I have experienced the things that regular people have to work with and live with. I am retired from the University of Tennessee, where I worked in departmental finance, so I've worked a little bit in education and handling financial matters. I'm retired from the U.S. military as well, where I did about 24 years, 4 combat tours, Bosnia, 2 trips to Afghanistan and Iraq. So I have the experience to know when we should get involved and when we should stay out in these national security issues. I'm also a minister for a small church in Maynardville, the Maynardville Church of Christ. And so there's a religious aspect. I felt like that there was an important area that was not being addressed properly by the other candidates. And the time was right. I have the ability at this time, and I think the issue was something I needed to get involved in.
And what is that issue in particular that you think is most important?
In 2006, 81% of the people in the state of Tennessee made a decision, and they said, we do not accept same-sex marriage. That was 1.4 million voters. And elections are about voters, and the 2nd Congressional District in this state matter. And so in 2015, the Supreme Court said nationwide that that was going to be that the voters of Tennessee did not matter, that they were going to be overruled, and they'd have to accept that doctrine. The issue has been presented nationwide as a civil rights issue versus a religious issue, and I have tracked this movement since the mid-'70s, and I've been actively involved since 2011 trying to get information out about the true nature of the movement. Same-sex marriage, and I give the people who believe that doctrine the right to believe that, certainly, and practice what they believe. That was a religious doctrine, a foundational religious doctrine of a church that was started in Los Angeles in 1968. And since it is once we establish it as a religious doctrine, then we have a religion versus religion discussion, not civil rights versus religion, but religion again compared to religion. And that certainly means that the government does not have the right to step in on the side of a doctrine that's been considered traditionally by all other religions immoral, and any law or ordinance that's been passed, including the Supreme Court ruling, the judicial ruling, would be unconstitutional because that violates the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution.
Let me ask you then, so
Sure.
If you're elected to Congress, if the folks from the 2nd District vote for you and send you to Congress, what difference will you make in regards to that decision?
The my first priority is getting the truth out, whether or not I get elected. I have published a book recently, and it is free, available free digital download from Amazon.com, or you can go to my website, StansberryForCongress.com, and it's available free every Sunday in July. And I'm calling July National Freedom of Religion Month. And so what I want to do is get this information out and then make the situation so the people who believe that doctrine can practice their doctrine, but they will not be suing people who simply say, I don't believe that, and they will not have it in our public schools, because part of that doctrine is being taught to our children, and it is a religious doctrine that should not be used in America's public schools.
You mentioned that the voters matter and their desires matter. In the state of Tennessee, the voters really want to see marijuana legalized. Is that something you would support?
I have seen marijuana. I'm 68 years old. I have seen marijuana in different situations, and I've told my doctor that they don't have the medical record yet, but I believe, based on what I've seen, There are a lot of medical complications that will come out in the future. I've seen a lot of cancer, for example, very unusual cancers in individuals who use the marijuana. I cannot support any drug being legalized. Now that's a state issue, of course.
Any drug being legalized, an illicit drug, is that what
illicit type drugs. Marijuana, you know, if we take marijuana, what's next? Is it going to be crack cocaine? You know, what next is going to be the thing that we want to bring out?
I think that's fair. I was just trying to zero in on your logic, saying when the voters want something, we need to listen to them, and they are saying that's what they want.
Well, as the you know, voters, you represent the best interests of the people. Once again, you do want to represent voters, but you don't want to do anything immoral. You know, there are certain things that hurt people.
So there are some lines there.
There have to be some lines, yes, sir, and I appreciate you making that point and helping me emphasize that. There are some lines that cannot be crossed. The health of people, their family and their futures are very important.
We've got to take a quick break. John North will lead us off in the next block. Stick with us with our 2nd Congressional District candidate, a Republican, David Stansberry.